Hello. The course is about the hydraulic assembly of XCMG XT87 backhoe loader series. XCMG XT87 is widely used in the construction of municipal engineering, building, oil field, water conservation, forest farm, military engineering, amongst other projects. It is able to be equipped with multiple working devices and engaged in excavating, shovel, carrying, crushing, leveling, and many other operations, realizing the purpose of a single machine for different utilization. Let's learn together the hydraulic assembly of XT87. First, let's have a general picture of the principle of the hydraulic system. This is the hydraulic system schematic diagram, and we shall focus on the hydraulic components of all hydraulic symbols represented first. Hydraulic oil cylinder, gear pump, priority valve, crushing valve, multi-way loading valve, multi-way excavating valve, braking hammer, optional, steering cylinder, tipping cylinder, boom cylinder, left support oil cylinder, large arm cylinder, bucket cylinder, rotary cylinder, bucket arm cylinder, right support oil cylinder. When the engine is started and that the driver does not operate any hydraulic control component, the power component of hydraulic system, the gear pump, will inhale oil in oil cylinder into pump and press it into priority valve, which will divide the hydraulic oil from gear pump into two routes, i.e. steering system and working system respectively. After that, the hydraulic oil in the steering system flows back to the oil cylinder via steering gear, and the hydraulic oil to the working system flows through crushing valve, multi-way loading valve, and multi-way excavating valve in turn before returning to the oil cylinder. There is no motion of hydraulic executive component during this process. When turning left on XT87, the driver should rotate steering wheel counterclockwise to enable the hydraulic oil to flow from priority valve into the left chamber of steering cylinder by rotation of steering gear, which is driven by steering column. Push piston rod to move towards right afterwards, pushing the front wheels to turn left so as to realize the eventual left turn of XT87. The faster the driver rotates the steering wheel, the more hydraulic oil the priority valve distributes to steering system at oil port of steering gear signal, controlling the movement of priority valve spool, so that the faster the piston rod of steering cylinder stretches out and steers. The slower the driver rotates the steering wheel, the less hydraulic oil the priority valve distributes to steering system at oil port of steering gear signal, controlling the movement of priority valve spool, so that the slower the piston rod of steering cylinder stretches out and steers. When XT87 needs to turn right during operation, the driver should rotate steering wheel clockwise. The principle is the same as the one of turning left. When XCMG XT87 needs to perform excavation or loading operation, the driver should control the outstretch and retraction of all oil cylinders by the value operating handle to operate the movement of structural parts of all parts. When excavator bucket needs to perform excavation operation, the driver should control the multi-way excavating valve to pull out the spool of bucket association. When the hydraulic oil inhaled from oil cylinder is sent to working system by gear pump. When hydraulic oil flows to excavator bucket association, due to the condition that its spool has been pulled out, hydraulic oil is unable to flow to the next association via excavator bucket association. Instead, it flows to no rod chamber of excavator bucket cylinder through an oil way of excavator bucket association, and then the piston is pushed to move to extrude the hydraulic oil in rod chamber of excavator bucket cylinder. After that, the hydraulic oil returns to oil cylinder through another loop of excavator bucket association, so as to realize the excavation through the extension of the piston of excavator bucket cylinder to push excavator bucket. When the excavator bucket needs to perform retraction operation, the driver should control the multi-way excavating valve to push the spool of bucket association when the hydraulic oil inhaled from oil cylinder is sent to hydraulic working system by gear pump. When hydraulic oil flows to excavator bucket association, as its spool has been pushed out, the hydraulic oil is unable to flow to the next association via extractor bucket association either. Instead, it flows to rod chamber of excavator bucket cylinder through an oil way of excavator bucket association, and the piston is pushed to move to extrude the hydraulic oil in no rod chamber of excavator bucket cylinder following the process. Then the hydraulic oil returns to the oil cylinder through another loop of excavator bucket association, so that the piston of excavator bucket cylinder retracts to full excavator bucket for realization of excavation. The principle of other operations is the same as the one of excavator bucket. In general, the hydraulic system consists of the following components: power component, control component, executive component, fitting, steel pipe, and hose. The hydraulic system of XCMG XT87 is also composed by the parts mentioned above. Its power component is working pump. Control components include priority valve, steering gear, crushing valve, multi-way excavating valve, multi-way loading valve, and its executive components contain rotary cylinder, boom cylinder, dump cylinder, large arm cylinder, bucket arm cylinder, bucket cylinder, and support oil cylinder. Now let's look at the power component of XCMG XT87. Working pump. Notes for pump assembly. The gear measuring pump, which is the working pump of the XCMG XT87, changes the static hydraulic oil without pressure in hydraulic tank into mobile hydraulic oil with pressure driven by engine. The hydraulic oil is sent to hydraulic system to push the hydraulic cylinder to realize a variety of motions. Next, let's go to the working site to watch the assembly of working pump. Number 1. Check the model and specification of pump. Please confirm its production certification and its manufacturing date, whether it is the pump for the model installed. 2. Appearance check. No rust, crack, trachoma, crack, bump on the pump, and machine tooling. Check whether there is seal protection on all oil inlets and outlets, and whether the valve hole is clean inside. Check whether there is damage on the threads of all oil inlets and outlets. Check whether the O-ring equipped is the one for the model installed, and if there is crack, distortion, and uneven diameter in the appearance of O-ring. 3. Appropriate lifting appliance should be employed to handle the pump with special care in the assembly process with the purpose of reducing damage to film and avoiding bumping machine surface. Assembly should be conducted with uniform force. Pounding on the pump with hammer is highly restricted. Bolts, nuts, and other standard parts should be placed in parts box, which shall not be placed on the ground, resulting in contamination by dust and other waste. 4. The assembly of connections between the pump and assembly part should be tight, and joint surface should be ensured to cling without deformation on connecting plate. 5. In fastening bolts, knocking bolts, screws, and nuts with hammer are forbidden. Clean and suitable wrench should be used, and they should be tightened successfully in the way of crossing symmetry. Pre- and successive tightening moves should be conducted according to the requirements of the tightening torque in assembly process. A bolt tightened in key part of assembly should be marked with paintbrush to ensure that all fastenings meet the requirements of torque required. Adjustable wrench should not be used in pre-tightening and tightening. The torque of bolt tightening should be implemented according to the torque table of bolts for model. No scratch or damage on the seals of the pump, nor does loading neglect. Notes for valve assembly. Now let's introduce the control components of XCMG XT87. This is priority valve, used to supply the hydraulic oil pumped into the system for steering system and working system respectively. When both systems need hydraulic oil, the valve will give priority to the steering system to ensure operation safety. This is steering gear. It can enable the hydraulic oil to flow into steering cylinder in certain proportion through the operation of the driver on steering wheel in order to realize the steering of the backhoe loader. This is crushing valve. Driver controls the switching of crushing valve via electronic control button so that the hydraulic oil in working system flows into cording hammer to fulfill the crushing function. This is multi-way loading valve. The driver operates the spool of multi-way loading valve by loading operating handle so that the hydraulic oil in working system flows into boom cylinder and bucket cylinder respectively to realize the loading function. This is multi-way excavating valve. The driver operates the spool of multi-way excavating valve by multi-way excavating operating handle so that the hydraulic oil in working system flows into rotary cylinder, large arm cylinder, bucket rod cylinder, bucket cylinder, and support oil cylinder to realize the function of complete excavation. Then let's go to the working site and take a look at the valve assembly. 1. Check the models and specifications of the valves. The product certification and manufacture date should be confirmed whether they are valves for the models installed. 2. Appearance check. No rust, crack, trachoma, crack, bump on the valves, and machine tooling. 3. Check whether there is seal protection on all inlet and outlet. 4. Check whether the threads of all oil inlets and outlets are damaged. 5. Gentle handles over the valves with care in the assembly process so as to reduce damage to film and avoid bumping machine surface. Neither gloves nor other sundry clothes should be worn in operation. 6. Assembly should be conducted with uniform force. Pounding on the pump with hammer is highly restricted. 7. The assembly of connections between the valves and assembly parts should be correct, and joint surface should be tight without deformation on connecting plate. 8. In fastening bolts, knocking bolts and screws and nuts with hammer are forbidden. Clean and suitable wrench should be used, and they should be tightened successfully in the way of cross symmetry. Pre- and successive tightening should be conducted based upon the requirements of tightening torque in assembly process. A bolt tightened in key part of assembly should be marked with a paintbrush to ensure that all fastenings meet the requirements of torque required. Adjustable wrench should not be used in pre-tightening and tightening. 11. The torque of bolt tightening should be implemented according to the torque table of bolts for model. No scratch or damage on the seals of the pumps, nor does loading neglect. Notes for oil cylinder assembly. Now let's introduce the executive component of XCMG XT87. The working principles of these oil cylinders are all the same. When hydraulic oil flows to the oil port near the bottom of the cylinder, it will push this piston to stretch it out. However, when it flows to the oil port near the rod head, it will push the piston to retract it. 1. Check the model and specification of oil cylinder. The product certification and its manufacture date should be confirmed, whether it is the oil cylinder for the model installed, or otherwise it shall not be fitted. 2. Appearance check. No rust, crack, trachoma, crack, bump on the cylinder, cylinder piston rod, and other machining tooling. 3. Check whether there is seal protection on all inlet and outlet, and whether there is protective cap for grease fitting. 4. Check whether the threads of all oil inlets and outlets are damaged. 5. Gentle handle over soft protective coating so as to lift the oil cylinder with care in the assembly process, reducing film damage and machine surface bump. Neither gloves nor other sundry clothes should be worn in operation. 6. Pin roll and oil cylinder assembly should be conducted with uniform force. Pounding on the pump with a hammer is highly restricted. Notes for steel pipe assembly. Now let's introduce the working site to watch the assembly of steel pipe. 1. Check the model and specification of steel pipe. Product certification and its manufacture date should be confirmed, whether it is the steel pipe for the model installed. 2. Appearance check. No rust, crack, trachoma, crack, bump on the steel pipe. 3. Check whether there is seal protection on the oil inlets and outlets of steel pipe. 4. Check whether the thread of all oil inlets and outlets are damaged. 5. Gentle handle over steel pipe with care in the assembly process so as to avoid bumping galvanized part and machine surface. Neither gloves nor other sundry clothes should be worn in operation. 6. The steel pipe should be installed on a solid, reliable, and stable manner. Pipe clamp or rubber mat should be used to increase damping and reduce vibration in positions prone to vibration. 7. No scratch or damage the seals on the steel pipe, nor does the loading neglect. Notes for hose assembly. Let's proceed to the working site to watch hose assembly. 1. Check the model and specification of hose. Product certification and its manufacture date should be confirmed, whether it is the hose for the model installed. 2. Appearance check. Whether there are crack, tackless, aging, damage, or cracking on the connection of rubber tube and mouthpiece amongst other parts. Check whether the specifications and dimensions of the hose diameter, number of layers of wire, and complete sets of hose meet the design requirements. If any serious defect found, they are invalid for utilization. 3. Check whether there is seal protection on oil inlets and outlets at both ends. 4. Check whether the threads of all oil inlets and outlets are damaged. 5. Gentle handle with care in the assembly process so as to avoid bumping machine surface. Neither gloves nor other sundry clothes should be worn in operation. 6. When the hose is connected with steel pipe, the thread oil port of hose should be connected parallelly with connection steel pipe with uniform force to pre-tighten and tighten instead of brute force. 7. Polar distortion of hose should be avoided, and the joint should be connected appropriately. 8. As there is -4% to +2% flexible change for hose in the working pressure, the length should not be in a strained state in assembly. 9. Sharp bend in connector should be avoided. The bending radius in assembly should be larger than 9 times of the hose outside. 10. If there is any contact or friction between outside surface of hose and the machine, a protective device should be installed on the outside surface, such as wire sheath or nylon sheath. 11. When the hose length is overwhelmingly long or bended, it should be fixed tightly, such as pipe clamp or rubber plate. 12. No scratch or damage the seals on the seal, nor does loading neglect. Notes for connector assembly. Then let's go to the scene to watch connector assembly. 1. Check the model and specification of connector. Product certification and its manufacture date should be confirmed, whether it is the connector for the model installed. 2. Appearance check. No rust, crack, trachoma, crack, bump on the connector. 3. Check whether there is seal protection on oil inlets and outlets of connector. 4. Check whether the threads of oil inlets and outlets of connector is damaged. 5. Gentle handle over the assembly process so as to avoid bumping machine surface. Neither gloves nor other sundry clothes should be worn in operation. 6. When the connector and rubber hose are attached with steel pipe, pump, valve, and other parts, They should be pre-tightened and tightened with uniform force instead of brute force. Upon use of bonded washer and connection, please inspect whether it is cracked or deformed.